Iniciamos el bloque de la P de prosperidad. Este busca lograr una sociedad donde los ciudadanos y ciudadanas tengan empleos dignos, desarrollen sus capacidades en un entorno con inclusión, donde se avanza con innovación y acceso a tecnologías sin desigualdades y viviendo en armonía con la naturaleza. Vamos a comenzar con este primer primer bloque, donde vamos a discutir sobre temas de liderazgo, valores y sostenibilidad, evidenciando nuevas reglas que se están redefiniendo redefiniendo el éxito empresarial y su aporte al desarrollo económico y social del Perú. Esta sesión va a ser en inglés para las personas que están en sala. Ya saben que a la entrada pueden tener los equipos de traducción, y las personas que están conectadas online saben que dentro de la plataforma tienen la opción en espacio de envío para la traducción. Ahora quiero presentar a Nelson Alvarado, gerente general de la Fundación BBVA, quien va a moderar este espacio. Adelante, Nelson. Bienvenido.
Gracias, María Antonieta, por la presentación. Es un honor, un placer para nosotros como BBVA, como la Fundación BBVA, tener este espacio hoy en Perú Sostenible 2022, poder compartir ideas, las nuevas ideas relacionadas al mundo de la sostenibilidad, a cómo también se está manejando el mundo de los negocios y del liderazgo a nivel mundial. Ahora, María Antonieta, let me switch now from Spanish to English to introduce Judy Samuelson. Judy is the founder and executive director of the Aspen Institute Business and Society Program and author of the book 6 New Rules of Business, Creating Real Value in a Changing World. In addition, Judy blogs for Cuál at Work and is a Bellagio Fellow and a director of the Financial Health Network. It's a pleasure for us to be with you today, Judy.
I'm great, thank you. I wish I could continue the conversation with you in Spanish. That would be really putting my Spanish to the test. Thank you so much for sharing this space today, Nelson, and for your support of this work.
For sure, we are going to talk about your book, 6 New Rules of Business, Creating Real Value in a Changing World. And also, we are going to talk about the global challenges of climate change and inclusive growth. In that way, I would like to start this interview, Judy, with a question about the real value of the companies. Customers, markets, and society as a whole not only expect large companies to create value, but also expect them to contribute positively to society. As businesses, how can we start to generate real value? What kind of scenarios should we consider?
So it's a big question, isn't it? Nelson, would it be okay if I share some thoughts? I have written this book, in essence, to kind of take on this question of how do we create real value in corporations? And I'm a big believer in business, and at the center of the book is basically the basic principle that we can't solve our most complex problems without business at the table. You know, it represents a significant share of our innovative capacity, our talent, our problem-solving skills, the global reach and distribution systems that we need in order to share ideas and resources. And so it's really written with business people in mind, and I appreciate this opportunity to share some thoughts. I'm going to share some slides if our partners here will share the screen. And so I just want to start with this idea that this is designed to provoke conversation, that the corporation is our greatest tool to assure our collective survival. I use this question in classrooms a lot, and most of the students will say, no, that's not true. It's definitely false. So the question really today is, how is change taking place in the business sector? This is a moment that takes us back to 2019, exactly a little over 3 years ago. Actually, it was August 19th, 2019, when the leadership of the Business Roundtable, which is the largest U.S. trade association of business corporations, when it put out a statement that essentially said, we're reframing how we talk about corporations. It's not about shareholder value. It's about creating value for all of those who contribute to the firm's success, what is called stakeholders. I don't particularly like that term, but I like that day. I thought it was a sign of real leadership, and I love the title of our session today with leadership and values and sustainability, because I think these are questions about leadership. But the question I'm most asked by colleagues and people that I speak to is, did they really mean it? Where is the evidence that business, in fact, has changed and has kind of turned the page on decades of putting shareholders and profit maximization at the center of the firm's success? And I would have to say that the jury's out. But what I'd like to focus on today is what are the changes that are taking place? And I'm going to focus on two of them. I wrote the book, there's 6 new rules, and I think they all are contributors. But I'm going to talk about 2 of them just very briefly today before we go on with the conversation. I would say this, that I think it's a moment of remarkable change. And I believe that the intentions of executives are real. I think they also believe that they're already doing it. They're already listening to their stakeholders of different kinds, employees, as well as those who make up, those who provide the license to operate. But I believe that it's also a question of business design, and that shareholder primacy is alive and well. And it's still guiding a lot of the actions of governance in the business sector today. So 2 points. One is that the value of corporations today are really one of the real strengths, and one of the things that's really driving change is it's no longer about hard assets. That the value of the company today is very much assigned more to intangibles like reputation and trust and talent and the ability to attract and retain the kinds of employees that we want, who are essentially the front door and the back door of the corporation. Access to natural resources, and this tricky question of license to operate, which is alive and well in the United States, where I have spent my entire professional career. But if I think back when I started this journey and when I exited my business school program in 1982, this is how business was taught, that it was very much about the financial value. A lot of the questions and the measurements and the tools that were taught were about measuring financial value. And customers have always been important. These other things were mentioned. Human capital really didn't mean that much to me. It was more about resource management. But today, if we cast forward, when intangibles are the source of value, the kind of mix here has changed a lot. Up here in the upper quadrant, the dollar signs that represent the financial capital, that's actually, it's interesting. A lot of our noise is still about finance, about measuring to the financial value. But if you think about companies that are newly going public today, they're actually not raising money in the capital markets. They've either raised their money privately, but they're also in industries that don't require ongoing investment of financial resources. So if you think about technology, it's very human dependent, but it's not very hard asset dependent. It's not like the days of General Motors being the top of the league tables, when they were constantly returning to the capital markets to build factories and to build their labor force. These companies operate with very few workers overall, and increasingly are doing things like putting labor out to contract rather than putting people on the payroll. So this question today of the human capital, of the role of employees, looms large. And I think that's the most robust question that's emerging. The other thing we talk a lot more about is governance. Governance was not even a topic really when I was in business school. And I think of the E, the S, and the G, the governance, the design, the decision-making, what do we prioritize and how do we assure that we're actually managing and operationalizing those intentions that these executives put forth in that statement of the Business Roundtable. So I have 6 rules that I explore in the book. I have talked a little bit about the question of rethinking risk when intangibles are the source of value. I want to focus on one more today. which is really about the employee. I think the employees today, and there's a chapter I've written in the book about this, they really are the key to accountability in corporations. If you think about it, they are the eyes on the supply chain, which is in fact a growing concern of corporations around the globe. They're the ones that manage the supply chain. They understand the risks that are embedded. They're the key to good customer service. Customers are always important. But unlike customers left to their own devices, rebound to price and convenience. Thus, we see the models, the successful models of companies like Amazon. Well, we have to ask, what's the real cost of a business model that's putting price and convenience ahead, it appears, of their support of the employees who facilitate that business model. So these questions are coming up with greater frequency, and I think they're interesting to continue to interrogate. How will the change take place? It's all about that. I think, and we work a lot with Korn Ferry, which has worked with us on a release on the design of CEO pay and whether the incentives are truly aligned with long-term value creation. And I think the jobs, I've learned a lot from Korn Ferry, which does a lot of search, of course, at the top of firms. And the basic concept is the job of the CEO has changed. The CEO today understands that they're the leaders of enterprises, but more like ecosystems than firm-specific value. And of course, they're facing systemic threats to commerce. We're seeing this across the globe and across our country as well as beyond. All of these questions about, the systems on which we depend and what is at risk. We're also seeing a lot of innovation happening from within, and this is a real strength. We have a program that's designed to support internal change agents. That's called the First Movers Program. We know one of your colleagues very well, Tony Villabriga, who was in that program at the very outset. These innovators are really driving a lot of change, and it behooves executives to figure out structures to be able to listen well to them. And then finally, I think we are seeing change from within industries and business coalitions, but I think often business coalitions rebound to those things that business always cherishes in common, things like low taxes, low regulation, and free trade. And those are not necessarily aligned with what's needed. We also need today corporations coming together in coalitions to solve big complex problems that they can't solve on their own. And I have a chapter I read on that as well. So that's a little introduction to the book and to the work that we've been doing and to how I think about how these changes are taking place. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing.
Judy, today the economic recovery after the health crisis is a major challenge. In addition, the world is at a turning point in the fight against climate change and focusing on inclusive growth. How to start generating business models that generate systemic change? What do companies need to do for this? Where should they turn?
Well, I think, we start with the basic premise that every company is different. There isn't one strategy that makes the most sense. When I write about the purpose of corporations, I'm drawn to stories of companies that have been at this for a very long period of time and who understood from the outset, were very clear from the outset about what constitutes value for their enterprise. So I write about Merck, which was one of the first companies to really start talking thoughtfully about corporate purpose, and who always understood that opportunity is created because of the scientific talent that they have. And if they don't pay attention to that and understand that those scientists that they're lucky enough to employ are drawn to the enterprise because they want to create value for humans. They're not there just to make money. And if they don't understand that, they're not going to unlock their innovation and their passion for their work in a clear way. I write about companies like Southwest, who always understood from the very beginning that employees were the key to a different business model. They chose to go the route that was not to rebuild the union the unions that were common in the domestic carriers in the United States, but instead said, if we really put employees at the center, can they create enough value that they will both benefit financially as well as be happy to come to work. And they really proved that model over a very long period of time, and the shareholders did very well because of this model. There are many examples of companies, people often talk about companies like Patagonia, where sustainability has always been at the center of the value creation that they've advanced. And there are many other companies as well. And so I always start with the fact that, are you really clear about what it is that constitutes value for your enterprise and what you need to put at the center of the bullseye if you're going to make sure that you're going to be working in that direction for the long term. And so, I think that's where it starts. But I think that today, if we step back and you mentioned, working in a time of very difficult economic recovery, and also the challenges of climate change, which are just continuing to flood the newspapers on a daily basis. We don't solve those problems one enterprise at a time. And I think it takes us back to the question of collaboration and co-creation. So we're starting to see more natural coalitions emerge within industries where the leading firms within an industry, the ones with the largest brands and therefore the most at risk in many respects, because they're going to be the ones that are targeted when things go poorly. Their willingness to step up and essentially say, we need to raise the bar on our own practices and bring the industry along in order to make sure that we, don't kill all the fish in the Barents Sea before, before their time. That we can tackle complicated problems. McDonald's does this over and over, where they're targeted with a problem, and then they're the ones that come to the table and build a coalition working with both NGOs and their producers and their suppliers and their entire kind of food chain, if you will, to take on complex problems like the sustainability of the beef industry. That is a worthy problem to work on, and they know that they can't do it without amassing the entire ecosystem of that enterprise, that industry. So we're seeing a lot of those questions, and I think smart companies are, finally, I think there's interesting questions around governance and listening to your own employees that we could talk about as well.
Now, Judy, let me talk about leadership. What is the role of the leader on this path? What kind of business leadership is needed to create prosperous and inclusive economies?
Well, there's my fantasy world, and then there's the world of reality. In my fantasy world, one of the things that CEOs would do is take a look at their own pay and see a system that's designed to put the shareholder ahead of everyone else. Now, I'm speaking very specifically about the United States of America, which continues to elevate stock price as being kind of the best arbiter of business success. And the executives in the US are paid, tagged with pay packages, 50, 60, 70% is weighted in stock. So you have to ask the question, if we're paying the executive to pump the stock price, should we be surprised when we favor, share buybacks over the kinds of investments that we probably need to sustain and build the enterprise over a very long period of time? So I think that's one interesting and complex question. So that's my fantasy world, that would come up. But I think we are seeing leadership from boards. I think we're going to see a lot of changes in boards over these next decades. And these next years, as the pandemic boards say, the boomers start to say, I've had enough, and make room for new voices to join boards. And I think we'll be seeing greater diversity on boards, more women on boards, and they are more inclined, it appears, from the actions that we observe. Women in particular are very inclined to be thinking about the human quotient of this problem. And so I am hopeful that boards and the leadership of the executive suite will be designing new modalities and new kind of protocols for assuring that employees are actually a part of the mix of the management of the enterprise. And we're listening in more creative ways to those things that employees are seeing that they know are critical to the long-term health of the enterprise and to the world in which they inhabit. They go home at night or stay home all day, depending on what enterprise they're in. And the lines between the business and, the communities in which they reside and the countries in which they vote have become very porous in this moment. And so, you know, they in fact are a real key to the long-term accountability of enterprises, but we need new and creative ways for executives to kind of lean into these questions and design enterprises where employees really are at the center of success.
Do you have any idea about business leadership in Latin America?
Very little. I've certainly enjoyed the time I've spent with executives in Mexico and Colombia, a little bit in Costa Rica and Chile. So I've had numerous opportunities to observe, but I've never worked for a business that's headquartered there. And I'd love to know your thoughts on how this resonates from your vantage point in Peru and beyond.
Judy, in your book, The 6 New Rules of Business, you mentioned that reputation, trust, and other intangibles drive business value. How do you think the success of a company is measured today?
I think it depends on the company. You know, companies that are public companies do this. They tend to still rebound to measures of success that make sense to short-term shareholders. So, you know, we talk about how does a change take place, and as I've said, I'm keen on the role of employees. I express some cynicism about whether customers are really going to lead us out of this. But I do believe in capital markets, you know, investors come in all shapes and sizes. We have long-term investors and we have very short-term investors. And we have investors that are barely there, you know, before flipping a stock. And all of those things drive a lot of different noise and different kinds of perspectives about the value of the corporation. The only one that truly matters to the enterprise are very long-term investors. You know, if you're leading a company and you're dealing with, you know, climate change or the security of the food system or fisheries, or, you know, you're in, you know, a tech company and you have questions about access to raw materials that are critically important and are at risk today. None of these problems get addressed in the time frame that investors would like. They would love to be able to kind of say, oh, I get that ESG thing, and wouldn't it be nice if the company I invest in is also a good company? But the measures of what constitutes a good company are vast, complex, and nuanced. They're not easily packaged for an investor who's trying to both, you know, what is the expression? Do well by doing good. You know, that's not the real world. The real world is, this is not a win-win world. There are real trade-offs involved in managing an enterprise. And so when we see that the stock price goes down, when people are put to work, when you grow the employee base, or when you commit to raising wages, you know, the stock price goes down, and it may stay down for an indefinite period of time. That's certainly what Walmart experienced when it pledged to raise wages of their frontline workers. So that's the reality. There are real trade-offs. And why would the stock price not go down? Of course it would go down if the company, as a result of paying higher wages today, is going to be less profitable today. You have to have a very long-term view to value the importance of having wages keep pace with, you know, what constitutes a real cost of living, and it's a real living wage. And so Walmart, you know, because they have a family that owns a lot of stock and they're able to withstand those short-term pressures, perhaps, was able to, you know, stay the course, and they continue to innovate around how they work with their employees. And so we look at that as points of strength. They're going to measure things very differently than a company that is very, very vulnerable to the pressures of the stock market. And so that's why I think we really have to step back and say, you know, are we working with companies that are very clear on what needs to be true for them to create value over the long haul? Do they have the internal metrics to know that they are actually staying on course? And the last thing I'll say is a lot of this rebounds to culture. it bounds to is the culture of the enterprise, a robust culture, and in fact, is the design of the enterprise continuing to build that culture. So an example of, one of our fellows who works at for a fund at Morgan Stanley collaborated with researchers and found that the best way to measure the health of the culture of the companies he was investing with was really to measure retention. And there are ways to access public information about retention through LinkedIn and the like, particularly for companies that hire a lot of professionals. And that was a window into whether or not the pronouncements about the culture that resides within a company was actually playing out. So we invite companies to get clear on what's most important to them and to think about what are the things that need to be true in order to know that we're continuing to be on progress. We're on track in order to bring about progress. The stock market's going to go up and down. And of course, even long-term pension funds want a decent return. I mean, they're under pressure as well. So there's a lot to deal with on that side of the market as well, and we respect that. But I think the companies that are at the table that we really believe in are very clear on why they're there and what they aim to accomplish and how they measure it internally.
Judy, in your book, you also mentioned that an old rule was capital is king, shareholders rule. That has changed to make way for culture and talent. Why is it important that companies are aware of this new feature and value the organizational culture and the talent of their employees?
Within an enterprise, if we want the best out of our employees, and one of the reasons I don't like the term stakeholder is because we tend to apply the term stakeholder to employees. I don't think employees are a stakeholder. I think the employees are the company. There's no division between the employees and the enterprise. Of course, employees have a stake in the health of the enterprise, but they're the window into both risk and opportunity. They are the enterprise. What else is there? It's not a hard asset world. And we increasingly see this with the growth of the tech sector, which, understands and, painfully understands the cost of not retaining talent. So, that's what it comes down to. That for, in the markets today, that constitutes real value creation. When you can establish the kind of reputation and become the kind of enterprise that an employee seeks out and wants to stay at, and you're able to retain them for a long period of time, and they move from strength to strength.
Thank you for this conversation, Judy. You help us understand how and why the rules of business are changing. Do you mind if I switch from English to Spanish to summarize the key points of this talk for the Peruvian audience?
No, thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Judy. Thank you so much. Ha sido una conversación realmente muy interesante con Judy Samuelson en relación también a su libro Las 6 nuevas reglas de los negocios, ¿no? Un libro que trae realmente información muy, muy valiosa y que nos hace preguntarnos qué necesitan las empresas para aportar al desarrollo económico y social del país. ¿Cuáles son las nuevas reglas que están redefiniendo el éxito empresarial? ¿Cuál es el rol de los líderes en este proceso, ¿no? Y creo que lo importante de esta conversación, lo que podríamos rescatar del conocimiento de Judy en estos temas, ha sido cómo los intangibles difíciles de medir, como la reputación, la confianza, la lealtad, los valores, el propósito incluso de las empresas, están imponiendo nuevas formas de evaluar el riesgo y la oportunidad en la gestión de inversiones y activos. Además, ¿no?, explica cómo los líderes empresariales pueden impulsar el cambio y cómo pueden empezar a crear valor, ¿no?, centrado en el largo plazo, empoderando a los trabajadores, a los colaboradores, a los empleados de las empresas también como uno más de los stakeholders y aliados más importantes de los negocios. Creo que es importante también esta reflexión de Judy respecto a que el éxito de las empresas no se mide hoy solo por la cuenta de resultados, por los números que muestra el balance, sino por cómo se integra la sostenibilidad en sus modelos de negocio, cómo se conecta con los desafíos sociales y globales y ambientales también que enfrentamos, por supuesto, en la actualidad, ¿no? Los modelos de negocio deben empezar a repensar cómo generar valor real. Para ello se necesita un tipo de liderazgo en particular que busque la co-creación, la colaboración, las alianzas y se pueda visibilizar, ¿no? Y tomar en cuenta a los diversos stakeholders, incluyendo, por supuesto, a los colaboradores de la misma empresa, los trabajadores, los empleados, ¿no? Vemos también que se habla mucho en temas sostenibles de la parte social, que por supuesto es muy importante, ¿no? Las acciones sociales, como también la sostenibilidad está vinculada a la responsabilidad social, a los objetivos de reducir la desigualdad y promover el emprendimiento, por ejemplo, del ODS número 8, crear oportunidades para todos a través de la educación, en el ámbito financiero, a través de la educación, de la inclusión financiera, por supuesto, que se enmarca dentro del ODS número 4, ¿no? Apoyar a la investigación, la cultura también está dentro, digamos, de las perspectivas sociales a través del ODS número 9, pero creo que la reflexión más clara es que la lucha contra el cambio climático supone hoy una de las mayores disrupciones de la historia, con consecuencias que todavía no somos capaces de medir, pero que van a tener también repercusiones económicas extraordinarias, por lo que se necesita, como comentaba Judy también, que todo nuestro entorno, gobiernos, reguladores, empresas, consumidores y la sociedad en general, se una y empiece a pensar en una adaptación a este tema del cambio climático, una transición hacia una economía más baja en carbono y también a promover el crecimiento inclusivo. Por eso estos espacios como Perú Sostenible 2022 son tan importantes para que en Perú también empecemos a tratar y a conversar sobre estos temas. Muchas gracias a Perú Sostenible por la invitación. Muchas gracias también a la audiencia por seguir esta conversación y los invito a continuar con el evento de Perú Sostenible 2022. Un saludo afectuoso para todos. Muchas gracias.
Gracias Nelson y Judy por explicarnos las formas en que las empresas pueden generar valor compartido y conectarse con los desafíos sociales, económicos y ambientales que enfrentamos. Con esto estamos terminando la mañana del último día del evento. Espero que hasta ahora hayan disfrutado de las sesiones. Los invito a hacer una pausa hasta las 3 de la tarde, donde reanudamos. Muchas gracias.